And he was the one. And even he had his moment where I guess they sort of hit the wall. It's a sort of a wall that they hit.
Well, it's a story that John and I were sort of vaguely familiar with, but until we went back and excavated it, we didn't understand the full depths of it. There's a lot in this book that people are finding new and interesting. We had the experience just a little bit ahead of everybody else because we covered the campaign full time, but as we did these interviews and heard all this new stuff, we would say to ourselves, we obviously were wearing bags over our head while we were out covering it day to day. In the case of Obama, he has this incredible 2006 midterm elections, the most popular surrogate in the country for Democrats. He goes on Monday Night Football. He goes to the Saddleback Church. He does his book tour, extraordinarily successful, and it propels him into the race.
Yeah.
Great opening event and initial burst. He then, for most of the spring and into the summer, is kind of a disaster as a presidential candidate. The weakest link in Barack Obama's campaign for most of 2007 was Barack Obama. The fundraising was great, the organization was great, the enthusiasm, but he was not very good as a candidate. And we trace the reasons for that. He was unhappy. Although they had warned him he'd be spending a lot of time away from home, he hated being away from Michelle and their daughters. Although he knew that people expected him to be a great speaker, he said he couldn't go out every time and give the Boston 2004 speech, and in fact he was not inclined to. He was evidencing then what he's shown a lot in the White House, that you want to treat people like adults. So he'd go to a town meeting and he'd get a question, a very passionate question about Medicare or something, and he would give a wonky 12-minute answer, drain all the energy out of the room.
And to grow into becoming Barack Obama.
So it doesn't come until the fall of 2007 when he is 30 points behind in the national polls. His donors are in a panic saying, you're losing this thing, we bet on the wrong horse, that he becomes a great candidate. Horrible in the debates throughout most of 2007. So he has this huge crisis, and it is to his credit that there are times when he calls his staff together for some meetings that have never been reported on that are pretty dramatic as political meetings go, and says, in some cases, stay the course, this plan works, but in other cases saying, you know what, we need to make some adjustments.
Well, you humanize Hillary, but you also humanize Obama. They're each less of these otherworldly figures that the media has made them by virtue of your book. Knowing what you know about Obama's ability to deal with these kinds of things in a campaign, he basically is in a campaign now with the midterms. How do you see him navigating what he's got up ahead between now and the midterm elections?
Well, as Mark just indicated, I mean, there are a couple of big moments that I think of as moments that are similar, parallel to this moment in the campaign. One is the moment Mark just talked about at the end of in the fall of 2007. Most of the Democratic Party that's on Obama's side is freaking out, as well as his fundraisers freaking out because they think that he's going to lose Hillary Clinton. He needs to dramatically change course, go negative, attack her, et cetera, et cetera. A year later, in the fall of 2008, in the immediate aftermath of the Republican convention, when Palin mania was really on the loose, before the financial crisis happened, and John McCain moved ahead in the national polls by a couple points. And again, Democrats, national Democrats, establishment Democrats went crazy with fear and panic. And in both cases, the campaign made some adjustments, but to a large extent, they dismissed these people as bedwetters, as David Plouffe liked to call them. That they were, that they had, that they.
Well, and Obama dismissed them too. He was like,
so I get it. Their notion was, we have a plan, we're going to stick to it. These people are just panicking. We have to keep our heads when all those about us are losing theirs. So now we have another situation that's similar, very similar in a way. It's a political crisis that they're in.
Do you see the same Obama?
And as of last night, it strikes me at least that they are not doing a dramatic mid-course correction. They are not heeding the calls of lots of Democrats to do something dramatic, to go either veer strongly to the left, veer strongly to the center, change the White House staff. None of those things seem to be on the cards for them. And the question is, and we don't know the answer yet, will this work as well for them in the governing context and the political governing context as it did in the campaign? Or did they overlearn the lessons of 2008 and are finding themselves less adaptable than they need to be?
But overconfident?
Well, overconfident and overlearning.
Over-rigid?
Overlearning the notion that, we have a plan,
But is that the same team
stay
around
the course.
them? It should seem that it would be possible to put them back into mode. Do you think that Rahm Emanuel's job is in jeopardy?
to the extent he leaves anytime soon, it's not because his job is in jeopardy, but that he doesn't like his job all that much, and he'd like
he
to
wants to run.
He only took it reluctantly. He'd like to be Speaker of the House. He carefully negotiated to keep his seniority. I think that nice man who's currently keeping his seat warm may not have it forever.
But what about running for against Burris? Is there any chance of that?
No.
So you think he would like to, if he could just wave a wand and walk gracefully out of the White House, it would be to go back into the House?
If they could find someone to replace him, you know, I'm not trying to stoke the notion that he's leaving or wants to leave or Obama wants him to leave, but it is always a question because the life of a chief of staff is pretty short. You know, very few of them, historically, very few of them stay for very long. I ask people all the time, including
Well, isn't winning in
who might
Massachusetts
lose.
sort
I
of
mean, who might replace
the
him?
chief of staff's job too, though?
And last night in an interview with Katie Couric, he took some responsibility for that. It is, and some people have gone back and looked at, you know, who's responsible for that. I wouldn't say the White House chief of staff has the primary responsibility for being an early warning on a Senate race, but he bears some responsibility for sure. It is testament to a lot of things, including Barack Obama's desire to have his very small group of top advisors be people he knows really well and trusts, that it's difficult to come up with someone who could step in and do that job as well as or perhaps better than Rahm Emanuel.
What we've seen, and what was true during the campaign, was that the people in that inner circle, Obama's enormously loyal to them, and when he hears people calling for their heads, he gets his back up against that. He pushes back against that instinctively. What he will do, and what he did do at a couple of key times during the campaign, was bring in, reluctantly, but eventually, when he sees it's absolutely necessary, is bring in the additional new voice. So
Yeah.
I think the more likely thing to happen, if there's a personnel change at the White House in the short to medium term, it's more likely that a new big voice comes in to augment the existing team rather than one of these guys getting the sack.
If the midterms go the way of Massachusetts, who does Barack Obama most have to fear?
You mean in 2012?
Yeah. Where's it going to
The
come
independent
from?
voter, or that's not the kind of answer you were
Well, I
looking for?
mean, I'm just wondering if there's, among your sources, if you're hearing of any, you know, anybody within the party. I mean, the obvious question is going to be, would Hillary, you know, step away?
Oh, you mean within the Democratic Party?
Yeah.
No, I think that he's like any incumbent who's got a smart political operation. They know, looking at the Bill Clinton 1996 model, that there are very specific things you can do as an incumbent that require concentration and focus, but aren't that difficult to execute to really inhibit the possibility of a nomination challenge, and they will do all those things.
I would only mildly disagree with Mark in the sense that I still think that there's a chance, depending on what happens with Afghanistan, that you could see a nomination challenge to Obama, but not from someone like Hillary Clinton, who's as much
Well,
the
because it
argument.
happened to Jimmy Carter.
Well, no, but I just mean because she's as much the argument. If the left decides that it wants to take on Obama, it will be, I think, largely over the war. So, is there someone like Russ Feingold who might get it in his crazy head to do that? It's possible. You know, Hillary Clinton, as the architect or one of the architects of his foreign policy, is not going to be in the best position to challenge
Right.
Obama from his left. And if there's going to be a challenge, that's where it's going to come from.
And if they really are bonded, maybe she's loyal to him now.
Well, as I say, they're certainly bonded on the subject of policy at this point. And
Yeah.
it would be hard for her to separate herself from him on that key issue at this point.
There's a better chance he doesn't run than somebody beats him for the nomination,
Wow.
I think.
Well, Sarah Palin is now a Fox News commentator, which I guess is how she's acquiring everything she's going to need to know. But do you see her as a serious candidate?
It's kind of like basically going to graduate school, you know, hanging around
that's
Fox
right.
News.
Yeah. But do you see her as a serious?
With Professor O'Reilly and Professor Hannity.
Yes, of course. Do you see her as a serious candidate?
I think that
Given all the people you've talked to who know her.
If it's a binary choice, yes and no, I take no. But she has a lot of strength. Up until the moment, she makes it crystal clear that she's not running in 12, endorses someone else, or deadlines pass. She will have more ability to get on television, to create news, to have reporters interested in her opinions than every other candidate who might run combined. And that's an extraordinary advantage. She will have the ability to raise some money in the grassroots. I think on the other side of the ledger, however, is she's going to have to show a greater capacity to explain policy. She's going to have to show a greater capacity to be disciplined. And if you look at the history of the Republican Party's modern nomination process, you need to, no disrespect meant by this, you need to have more support by people like this than people outside Washington and New York.